Daggerheart, the fantasy tabletop role-playing game from Critical Role and Darrington Press, came out a couple weeks ago. I had the limited edition set that I ordered back in fall. I waited until I was able to read most of this core rulebook and ran a few learn-to-play sessions at my game store as well as online, and ran this for my kids' D&D table as well too because they thought that this would be a great game. So I waited until I had done all that to kind of give some thoughts about the game Daggerheart. Now, a little bit of disclaimer, I'm going to tell you up front, I am a huge fan of Critical Role, obviously. So I recognize that I'm probably going to be a lot more favorable about Daggerheart for that reason, because Critical Role has made a huge impact on my life personally. They're the reason why I got into tabletop role-playing games about 3 years ago or so, and my kid and I really bonded over Dungeons & Dragons, and when I told them about Critical Role, they got into them as well too, so much that they asked for their birthday and Christmas if they can go meet Matt Mercer by doing a photo op and getting something signed at C2E2 in Chicago earlier this year. And we did that. Absolutely love it. It's probably one of the highest moments of both of our lives. And we just, can't get over the fact that that was something that we both enjoy and cherish for the rest of our lives. So yeah, I'm going to be a little bit biased by that. On the flip side, I will say that I try to make my things as objective and unbiased as possible. And to be honest, I was on the fence about Daggerheart before it came out because I was doing the beta testing and it was driving me nuts how often they were changing the rules. Why, Spenser? Why? That I eventually stopped before I even got to 1.5 because I just said I was going to wait until the official rules come out before I even looked at it. But I also had not so great experiences at the table when I was playing Daggerheart. So it was something that I just wasn't thrilled about when the game was going through play testing. And so that is one of the reasons why I think that this is going to be a little bit unique, is because even though I'm a huge Critical Role fan, I think that I'm coming into this as somebody that needed to be convinced about this a little bit more. So for full disclosure, I'm definitely biased. I think I'm going to be a little less biased, but I'll let you be the judge of that. So with that being said, I will say that I tried to record this video multiple times, and each time it was an hour long because there was just so much I could say about Daggerheart, both in terms of strengths and the challenges I have with it, and just some, recommendations. I don't want to put out an hour-long video. So I think what I'm going to do for this video is just kind of give a quick description of what are some of the key features of Daggerheart, what I thought were like the top 3 strengths about Daggerheart that I really enjoyed as a player and as a game master. So more from my point of view. Also, what are some challenges I have with this game, and maybe some recommendations I might have for this as well too. So what is Daggerheart? Daggerheart is a fantasy tabletop role-playing game that uses, instead of a D20, like a lot of fantasy role-playing games, it uses what's called a duality system. It has 2 D12s that you roll. One of the dice represents hope, and one that represents fear. Anytime you make an action roll, you roll both of those D12s, and you add the result together, plus your modifier, and you see if that number meets or exceeds whatever difficulty level you're trying to overcome. But the trick of it is that the higher die produces some sort of resource that you might get as a player or the GM might get. So if your hope die is higher, then you gain a hope that allows you to activate different abilities that you can do as a character. But if your fear die is higher, then you generate a fear for the GM for them to use to activate different abilities for the enemies or adversaries. Another feature about Daggerheart is that there's no initiative in combat in this game. It's very narrative driven, so it allows you to be like free flowing and not have a turn-based order in this. And so this can kind of be really interesting. I know a lot of people like it. A lot of people are not a fan of it. It can definitely get some used to. It takes a while to get used to it. I will say that, because it was kind of awkward because nobody wants to, step on anyone's toes or interrupt them if they want to do something. Like, everyone's just really polite, right? And I think by the 3rd or 4th session, like, people are a little bit more comfortable with each other, and so they're okay with like stepping up and saying things and all that. But there's no initiative order, which makes the gameplay very different and very interesting from other kinds of tabletop role-playing games. As I mentioned before, this is a narrative-driven, narrative-focused game, so there are mechanics and dice rolls that's involved with this, as well as rule set that's not necessarily light, but it isn't as complex as other role-playing games, but it's definitely centered around how does it support the story rather than the story fitting in the mechanics, if that makes sense. So definitely narrative-focused, and it allows you to be a lot more flexible with the story, as well as with the mechanics, because it gives you kind of like a baseline to work with. But if you need to like bend those rules to make it, fun and enjoyable for the story, they encourage you to do that. The last But not the only feature of Daggerheart that I think is worth mentioning here is that it's really focused on collaborative storytelling and playing. So there is still a game master, but the game master is encouraged to bring the players in for the world building and storytelling aspect. And I think it does a couple things. One, it kind of takes the pressure off the game master as well, but it creates more buy-in for the players so that way they can contribute to that. And it allows you to be able to add to the story and add those details as the story and game is unfolding. So you don't have to have everything figured out right away or ahead of time, and the players can contribute to it. So before you even start playing, they encourage you to create like a world map that both you and your players can add to, create names for it, describe what's in those cities or those towns or those locations. But even in moments where you have social encounters or combat, they encourage you to bring out a map and have everybody kind of, help, decorate or design the map. Like, well, what's going to be in this environment? What are, some maybe barriers or something that you see in this? And they encourage you to collaborate and build the map together, which I think is really cool. So those are, I think, the main features of Daggerheart that's really interesting. That's a huge highlight that I think would be interesting for everybody to know. Like, these are the core tenets or the core features of Daggerheart. How many times can I say features in this video? I don't know. So strengths about Daggerheart. There's so many I could list, but I'm just going to focus on probably my top 2 or 3. The first one is there are player principles and game master principles that they give you that you should play by as like kind of like a core rule to how to play at the table that I think is really universal and portable to any tabletop role-playing game. So you could take those principles and, use it in Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or, Shadow Dark, any of those kinds of games, and that will make your game that much more enjoyable and that much better as well too. Some of these principles are not unique to Daggerheart. They're found in other game systems as well too, but they made it such a focal point of Daggerheart that it's really cool to be able to see that these are the things that everyone should really agree upon. It kind of creates that social contract before you even start the game. I think one of the other strengths about Daggerheart is that this is a good game for anybody of any playing level. So if you're brand new to tabletop role-playing games or if you've been playing for a long time, there is something that everyone can really enjoy from this, that they can really jump in and learn to play and, be playing in the same day and feel like you got a good grasp on the game as well too. And I think this is a great game for anybody who is wanting to learn how to do tabletop role-playing games or even want to be a game master for tabletop role-playing games as well too, because this gives you just enough mechanics to kind of play with some of the complexity levels with it, but not overwhelm you with how many rules there are, and that it really encourages you to kind of focus more on how to tell the story to make it enjoyable for everybody at the table as well. And because this is a story-driven game, it really allows you to be a lot more forgiving about the rules because you're kind of focusing on what makes sense with the story versus what did the mechanics or the rules say as well too. So this is a really good one to kind of give you like a safe space to try out being a game master, but also try out playing a tabletop role-playing game as well too. And the last strength about Daggerheart I'm going to mention is that there are some really cool mechanics in here. The number one mechanic that I hear people say that they really enjoy, and that I know my kid have said multiple times that they enjoy a lot as well too, is the tag team feature, because you can spend 3 hope, which is a resource that you can accrue as a player, and you can initiate a tag team with another player in your party, and basically you team up to do like some sort of epic move or combat attack against an adversary or an enemy, and then you both roll your dice, and whichever roll result that you go with, you let that play out, and then if you deal damage to that adversary or that enemy, you both roll damage, and you add that together to deal damage to that adversary. All of my players absolutely love that. They use that, and they thought it was really cool how they can just really come up with some sort of creative way that doesn't have to fall within 100% line of the mechanics. In fact, a lot of times we had to figure out, what would they be rolling for in terms of trait roll and damage, because they were doing something that didn't really like included their weapon or anything else. And so we had to like come up with that. But that was a lot of fun, is that they get to suggest what they want to do. And as long as it made sense, they got to do that. So it was a really cool mechanic that they had there that I know everybody absolutely loves. There's another one called Death Moves, where when your character marks your last hit points, it gives you a lot of agency on how your character can be done with the game. You could do something called Blaze of Glory, where you have like one more action that you can do. It automatically critically succeeds, which is, like a rolling a nat 20, but for this game, if you roll the same number on both D12s, it's a critical success. So you automatically critically succeed, and you can do like some sort of epic move that kind of lets you, kind of go out in a blaze of glory, hence the name. There's also something called Risk It All, where you roll both your fear and hope die. Whichever one is higher determines if you continue or if your character dies. So if it's a hope die that's higher, you continue on and you gain some hit points back. But if your fear die is higher, then your character dies. And then there's another one, I forget the name of it, but basically you could just take a scar, which means that you permanently remove one of your hope slots, and then you narratively talk about how that changed your character, and you can continue in the game, and you're unconscious until someone like clears a hit point or you take a long rest, but you continue in the game, and then once you have taken enough scars where you don't have any more hope slots left, then your character has to end. But it gives a lot of player agency on how their character can really go out. That gives them options instead of, you just die. The challenges of Daggerheart. And again, this is my own perspective. This might not be the same challenge for everybody, but one of the biggest challenges I have with Daggerheart is that it relies a lot on ambiguity and improv. You have to be comfortable with the fact that you won't have every detail or even a lot of details or maybe even like a lot of story plots kind of planned out ahead of time. That terrifies me, to be honest. I'm not somebody that I'm quick on my feet to think about, how to fill in the details. There are people who are great at that. I am not one of those people. And I've written into Darrington Press asking them to create a venture module because I think if I had an adventure module, I would be a lot more comfortable with it because it gives me a lot of plot points that I can use. And I know for the games that I run and other tabletop role-playing games, I have that story, and then I can choose which ones to run with and which ones to change to adapt it to my characters and my players. And so for me, I just feel terrified every single time I run a game because I don't know if something will come up where I need to be flexible and come up with something on the spot to add to the story that makes a lot of sense. And so if you're not somebody that is very comfortable with being able to come up with like story points on the fly or, improvisation or things like that, this might be a struggle for you as a game master to run because it doesn't give you all of the details they might need. It gives some foundational things like campaign frames, give you something to work with, but it's more like an open sandbox rather than, here are the story plots that you can work with. You have to fill in a lot of those details with your players, and that's just not a strength of mine, I don't find, for that. So that being said, my kids' D&D table, they all want to switch over to Daggerheart to try that. So next year, we are going to use Daggerheart for our main game, and I'm going to be running that. So we'll see how that goes. I feel like kids are a lot more forgiving than anybody else. So I'm more comfortable with running that for my kids and see how that goes. And so a year from now, I might have a different story. I might say that, this is actually great. It doesn't matter if you're great at improv or not. It's probably fine. But for right now, I'm terrified. The rules are also a kind of a challenge, I think, for some people. It's not necessarily a challenge for me, but I can see how it'd be a challenge for somebody that might want to have more black and white, concrete answers on how to rule things. They really encourage you to have kind of like a loose framework so that way you can work with that framework and make rulings over rules, which is the case for a lot of role-playing games, but Daggerheart really leans into that. And if you're somebody that you'd much rather have clear, cut rules that kind of says like you can do this in this situation, you can't do that in that situation, Daggerheart will be a struggle and a challenge for you because it definitely doesn't have that caked in there. There are rules that says like here are things you can and can't do, but it's not too prescriptive where it kind of has this whole list of like, here are the things you can do and here are the things you can't do, like listed out for every single scenario ever possible. So if you're somebody that you much rather have a lot of things kind of ruled out ahead of time without it being, reliant on you making a ruling at your table, this could be a challenge for you. Last but not least, I got to say the Adversaries chapter I had a hard time with. The battle guide I thought was going to be simpler, which is telling you like how to create your encounters and how to create your combat. The formula that they give you is very simple. It's 3 times your player characters plus 2. That part I get. But then you have to refer to 2 tables to figure out how to create your encounter, which for a game that really encourages you to like, make decisions on the fly, improv, I feel like this is the part that will probably hold up people because you have to look at how many points you have, and you have to look at like what are some of the factors that's going into this encounter, like the types of adversaries you might have, the things that you want your adversaries to do, different things like that. And then you kind of add or take away points based on that. And then you look at a table to see what kind of adversaries you would, how much points you're going to be spending per adversary. So that's something that I thought would have been a little bit more streamlined. It's not terrible. I've used it, and it didn't take that long to do, but at the same time, I kind of had a clearer picture of what I was doing for adversaries. And so it's something that can definitely be a challenge if you're trying to improv some of this stuff on the fly, that it's going to take a minute to figure that stuff out and to calculate that. But the other thing that I was kind of disappointed in, to be frank, is the how to create your own adversary, or how to what's the word I'm looking for? Make your own. So they call it make your own adversary. Um, the challenge I had with this is that it didn't really give, again, it wasn't formulaic in terms of how to make your own adversary. So, for example, for a solo adversary, they kind of give you an idea of how to make your own, but it's not really clear why you would do it that way. It's kind of ambiguous in terms of the decision making process here. So, for example, it says, it talks about here we go. It talks about something being inscrutable, being of twisted metal and flesh. And so one of the bullet points they have here is that given their strange and unpredictable nature, 15 seems like an appropriate difficulty. Why? And so that's one of the challenges that you're going to have here, is that a lot of the make your own like principles here is just not clear why you would choose that number. And again, I think it goes along the lines of the spirit of Daggerheart, that they want you to create what makes the most sense for you, your style, and for the story. But I think that will be a challenge for people. They want to have something a little bit more prescriptive and formulaic as to how to create their own adversary. So I have been told that they are creating like some sort of homebrew creation system that will give more guidance on it, which is great, and I think that's needed. But for something like the core rule book, I'm looking at all those, and I'm like, I still have no idea like why I would, add this for that reason. So that's one of the challenges I had, that I think other people have. And I know other people have mentioned that that was a challenge for them as well too. But that was one of the things that I wish was improved in this core rule book, is that it was a little bit more clear about why you would make your own that way, and that it has some sort of prescription or some sort of formula that you can use. So those are the strengths and challenges that I've had with Daggerheart. My recommendation about this game is that if you are somebody that wants to game master for the first time, I think this would be a great game for you to do that in, as long as you're comfortable with ambiguity and improvisation. If that's something that you feel like is not a strong suit of yours, then it might be something that you might want to hold off until. But even then, I would say run a one shot and see how you feel about the game and how you feel about running it, because it gives you enough support to run with it, that it's not going to, hold you back in terms of the amount of mechanics that goes into it. And it's a lot more forgiving, in my opinion, in terms of, if you make a ruling that kind of, goes astray from the official rule, I don't think you're going to be breaking the game by doing it that way either, unless you're being egregious with the intent and all that. But this is a great game to really just try a one shot out, and they have a one shot guide in there. Even though it seems to think that you can come up with a story within 15 minutes. I don't know how they came up with that. I did not take 15 minutes to play in a one shot. I took a whole week to do that. But playing a one shot, try it out, see how you feel about it. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised about how well structured this game is. That is very new GM friendly game for people who want to start becoming a game master for the first time. I would also say lean into your players a lot when it comes to the narrative storytelling. Definitely lean in your players. If you can't come up with a rationale or a, detail, something like that, Daggerheart really encourages your players to be part of that collaborative storytelling process. And so definitely lean into your players when you have a moment where you can't figure something out or you don't know the answer. Have your players suggest something like that. Last but not least, I ran Daggerheart for different size tables. I find that the more players at the table, just like any role-playing game, the harder it gets to run, because everybody is playing this game because they like the storytelling aspect of it. It's not the sole reason, but it's definitely a big contributing factor to it. And people just want to add on to it, which is so great, but it can take a while to get through a session. And so I think that 5 maximum is probably a great number to work with. If you go more than 5, then you just got to plan for it being a little bit longer than you're expecting. But I think maxing at 5 is a really good size table for Daggerheart. So that's my thoughts about Daggerheart. If you enjoyed this game, tell me what else you enjoyed that I didn't mention in this video. If there's something that you have a challenge about this game, and again, be civil about this, let me know what are some challenges that you've had about playing Daggerheart, and maybe the community might, help us figure out together how we can play this, and support one another in playing this sort of game or running it as well. But thank you for watching this video. I think in the future, I'm going to release a video about how to use Owlbear Rodeo to run a game of Daggerheart, because that's what I've been using for my online games. And surprisingly, it actually gives you a lot of great ways to be able to run a game through virtual tabletop, such as Owlbear Rodeo. So I will release that probably next couple weeks or so. But thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed it.